The first thing people noticed about Clay Maddox was not his size, or the way his boots struck the porch boards like a final decision. It was the silence that followed him. Clay didn't speak much anymore. Not since the winter 3 years back, when pain carved itself into his body and settled there like a permanent tenant. The old wound sat just beneath his ribs, a reminder of a night gone wrong, a stampede, a broken fence, and a body crushed where it should never have been crushed. The doctor had warned him. The neighbors had whispered it. And Clay himself felt it every cold morning when he tried to breathe too deep. "Don't," people would say when they saw him lift something heavy. "It still hurts there." And Clay would nod. Because they were right, but he would do it anyway. Because pain had never stopped a Maddox from finishing what needed doing. The ranch was failing. Drought had cracked the earth like an old plate. Cattle were thin. And the bank letters came more often than the rain. Clay worked alone now. His father was buried on the hill. His mother followed 2 years later, quiet as she lived. The house was too big for one man, but Clay slept in one room and let the rest gather dust and memories. Every step he took across the land reminded him of what he'd lost. Not just health, not just money, but the future he once imagined. A future with laughter, with a woman, with children running through the tall grass. Pain had taken more than muscle. It had taken hope. That was when the letter arrived. Not from the bank, from the county clerk, a legal notice tied to an old promise his father had made during a drought worse than this one, a marriage agreement. Not romantic, not forced, just practical. The Maddox land had once been saved by a loan from the Calder family, and the repayment clause was unusual. If debts ever rose again, a union could bind properties, save both names, and keep the land from outsiders. Clay laughed when he read it. A bitter short sound. He folded the letter and shoved it into the stove, watched the paper curl and blacken. Marriage? Who would want a half-broken rancher with a scar that still screamed every night? 2 days later, she showed up. Her name was Eleanor Calder. She did not arrive dramatic or demanding. She rode in on a tired horse, dust on her skirt, eyes steady but cautious. She carried her own scars too, though Clay wouldn't learn where yet. She stood on the porch like someone who had practiced, courage all the way there, and was now testing if it would hold. "I'm not here to force anything," she said quietly. "I just came because the land matters, and because sometimes pain shared is lighter." Clay wanted to tell her to leave. Wanted to say, "Don't, this place hurts." Instead, he felt the familiar stab under his ribs as he stepped forward to help her down from the horse. Eleanor flinched when his hand brushed her side accidentally. "Don't," she whispered before she could stop herself. "It still hurts there." Clay froze, not because of the words, but because she said them the same way he'd heard them his whole life. Like pain was something you learned to live around, not escape. That night they ate in silence. 2 wounded people at opposite ends of a long table. The wind rattled the windows. Clay realized something terrifying then. Not that he might lose the ranch, but that he might lose the chance to feel human again if he sent her away. Pain had ruled his life long enough. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice was steady but soft. "I'm not asking for love," she said. "Just partnership, respect, and time." Clay looked at his hands, scarred, shaking slightly. "I can't promise I won't hurt you," he said. Eleanor met his eyes. "Neither can I." And in that moment, Clay Maddox made a decision that would change everything. He would do it anyway. Marriage did not fix Clay Maddox. It did not heal the wound beneath his ribs or erase the nights when pain woke him gasping, but it changed the shape of the silence. Eleanor moved through the house carefully at first, as if learning the temperament of an injured animal. She never rushed him, never touched the scar without asking. Some days she would simply sit nearby while he worked through the pain, reading or mending, her presence steady as a fence post. Clay learned something strange. Then that strength did not always come from pushing through pain, but from letting someone witness it. The town did not approve. Whispers followed Eleanor in the store. Some said she married for land. Others said Clay had trapped her. Neither were true. What bound them was quieter and harder to explain. On mornings when the pain was too sharp, Eleanor took over the ranch accounts. On days when her past crept up in the form of fear or sudden silence, Clay stood between her and the world without asking why. They learned each other slowly, respectfully, painfully, and honestly. One spring afternoon, Clay collapsed in the field. The old wound flared worse than ever. He tried to stand. Eleanor ran to him, fear flashing across her face. "Don't," she begged, pressing her hand near his ribs. "It still hurts there." Clay closed his eyes, breath ragged. "I know," he said. "But I'm still here." That was the moment. Eleanor realized she had not married a broken man, she had married a man who refused to let pain decide his ending. The ranch survived that year. Barely, but it survived. And so did they. Love didn't arrive like thunder. It came like rain on dry ground, slow, soaking, life-giving. Clay never stopped hurting completely. Eleanor never stopped carrying her past. But together they built something stronger than comfort. They built endurance, trust, a future that didn't deny pain but walked forward anyway. Years later, people would say the Maddox Ranch was saved by a marriage. They were wrong. It was saved by two people who heard "don't, it still hurts there," and chose to keep living together. Time did not erase the pain in Clay Maddox's body, but it changed how it lived inside him. It no longer ruled every breath. Seasons passed, marked by Eleanor's quiet routines and Clay's stubborn refusal to surrender to weakness. The scar beneath his ribs still burned on cold mornings, and some nights he sat on the edge of the bed, jaw clenched, waiting for the ache to loosen its grip. Eleanor never asked him to be stronger than he was. She simply stayed. Sometimes that meant pressing warm cloths against his side. Sometimes it meant sitting on the floor beside him in the dark, saying nothing at all. Clay learned then that love did not demand perfection. It demanded presence. The ranch slowly changed too. Fences were repaired not in rushed agony but in careful stages. Eleanor learned the land the way one learns a difficult truth. Patiently, respectfully. She brought ideas Clay had never considered. Rotating grazing, new trade routes, fairer contracts. At first Clay resisted not because they were wrong, but because accepting help meant admitting he could not do everything alone anymore. One afternoon, when the pain flared and he tried to lift a beam that was clearly too heavy, Eleanor's voice cut through the dust and sunlight. "Don't," she said, not sharply, not afraid, just firm. "It still hurts there." Clay froze, breath shaking. For the first time in his life, he listened. He set the beam down. That moment felt bigger than any deal signed or fence built. It felt like survival choosing wisdom over pride. But pain, like the past, has a way of returning when you think you've made peace with it. The drought worsened that summer. Wells dropped lower than anyone remembered. Neighbors began selling off cattle. The bank returned, this time in person. The man spoke politely, professionally, but his words were sharp as wire. If the next payment failed, the land would be taken. Eleanor watched Clay's face harden, the old silence settling over him like armor. That night, Clay sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars the way men do when they're preparing to lose something they love. Eleanor stepped beside him and rested her head against his shoulder. Clay flinched at first, the wound protested, but he didn't pull away. "If it ends," he said quietly, "I don't want you trapped with me in the fallout." Eleanor looked at him then with a steadiness that startled him. "I didn't marry land," she said. "I married a man who stands up even when it hurts. Wherever you go, I go." The breaking point came during a late summer storm. Rain finally arrived, but with it came chaos. A flash flood tore through the lower pasture, scattering cattle and ripping away fencing. Clay had spent months rebuilding. Clay rode out anyway, despite Eleanor's protests, despite the sharp warning in his body screaming him to stop. Halfway through pulling a calf from the rising water, the pain hit like a hammer. He collapsed into the mud, gasping, vision swimming. Eleanor reached him just as he tried to force himself upright again. She grabbed his shoulders, eyes wide with fear. "Don't!" she cried. "Please don't, it still hurts there." Clay looked at her through the rain, finally understanding what those words truly meant. They were not a command to give up. They were a plea to stay alive. He let go. Let the ranch hands finish the work. Let Eleanor help him onto the horse. Let himself be carried home. That night, fever took him. The old injury, ignored too long, demanded its price. The doctor stayed until morning, shaking his head but relieved. He waited too long, the doctor said, but he didn't wait too late. Eleanor sat by Clay's bed as dawn broke. holding his hand while he drifted in and out of sleep. When he finally woke fully, the pain was still there, but something else was there too, peace, the knowledge that he did not have to fight alone anymore. Recovery was slow, slower than Clay liked, but in that stillness something extraordinary happened. The community stepped in, neighbors repaired fences. The bank renegotiated. When they saw Eleanor's ledgers and the ranch's renewed promise, rain returned gentle and steady. Grass grew back greener than before. When Clay finally walked the land again, leaning slightly but standing tall, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, gratitude without bitterness. One evening, months later, Clay and Eleanor stood on the hill where his parents were buried. The sun dipped low, painting the land gold. Clay took a careful breath. It still hurt, but it no longer frightened him. "I used to think pain meant I was finished," he said. Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Pain just means you're still here," she replied. Clay looked at the ranch spread out before them, alive and breathing again, and then at the woman beside him. "I didn't do it right," he admitted softly. "I pushed too hard. I ignored the warnings." Eleanor smiled, tears in her eyes. "But you listened in the end." Clay nodded. "Yeah," he said. "And because of that, I got a life. I got a wife." Years later, folks would tell the story of Clay Maddox, the rancher who should have quit. The man who heard "don't, it still hurts there" and learned that strength wasn't in enduring pain alone, but in choosing love over pride. They would say the ranch survived against all odds. What they wouldn't fully understand was this: the real miracle wasn't the land. It was a broken man who dared to stop, to listen, and to live long enough to become a husband, a partner, and finally whole.